Hello, so here we are again. We've now got this engine set up, got the ignition timing done, we've done all the rest of it and saw all that in the last video. Now what we're going to concentrate on today is we're going to concentrate on doing the carburetors 1 and 2. Okay, now what I'm going to do, because this engine is running reasonably well now, is I'm going to show you where the linkages are and where the controls are, and then what we'll do is I'll take a carburetor off and I'll show you how to set it up. In fact, I'll probably do both of them again. Once you've done them and got them right, it doesn't take long. Okay, and then finally after that we then set it up with a whole new wiring loom and vacuum leads and make the engine work nicely. Here we are with a carburetor and its manifold, whoops, big camera swing, off the engine. Okay, it's all been set up, but I'm going to show you how to do it. Now I've just put it in the vise here because it's quite useful to be able to demonstrate one of the trickiest bits of getting one of these carburetors set up right, and that is the throttle stop and the operating arm. Right? Now, the easy way to tell if the thing is set up about right I want to hold the choke closed and open the throttle, and it should step onto the idle cam. Let's see what happens. Ah, that went clunk. Right, now the choke is closed and there we are. The throttle gap is open, so that is now on the fast idle cam, right? And the fast idle cam is basically inside here. This is where everybody goes wrong on these, right? And so that when I refire the throttle, I'm just trying to get it so you can see. Right, you can see that's open. When I refire the throttle, and the choke comes off, you can see that this now is touching. Okay? And when that's touching, the bottom butterfly, the throttle position, has to be right. If it's not right, if you screw it up too tight, which is easily done, then what happens is you don't get enough air and fuel going through. And when you don't get enough air and fuel going through, it either won't take over or it won't pull away. Okay, now I'm going to take the carb off the manifold and I'm going to show you the throttle valve setting. So here we are with one of the carburetors off this 2-litre engine, right? This is a Solex 32 PDSIT 3. In other words, it is, as you look from the rear of the vehicle, the right-hand carburetor. Okay, now setting these up is a bit like making a string or a wind quartet, a woodwind quartet with 4 instruments that must all be harmonious together. Now, before you do anything too much to the carburetor, what you've got to do is you have got to be able to set this butterfly here for two circumstances. Number one, warm idle, and then secondly, for it to be set at fast idle on the choke. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the choke plate off and show you how the whole mechanism works, because I think you have to understand how it works to be able to adjust it properly. The only sort of special tools you're going to need are a micrometer, a vernier gauge, you know, sort of digital thing, and I use control wires. This is 0.6 millimeters. You can get this either in a reaming kit, or you can use 0.6 TIG welder stainless steel wire, if you happen to know a TIG welder. Right, I'm going to take this off now. I'm going to take this off now, and I'm going to show you how the whole thing works. Okay. Now we've got the top of the choke mechanism open, and we've got to be able to set the thing in two ways. We've got to set this, we've got to set this, I'm looking in the other camera now, this setting at the right amount, but also so that when the choke is fully on, you see it sitting on the step, right? That's controlled. Then through this control rod, we've got to get again the setting right. Now it's a bit confusingly explained in some of the handbooks, so I'm just going to try and show you a nice easy way to do it. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to set the bottom setting on idle without any choke. Okay. To do this, one of the easiest ways to do this is to have the choke open, shine a torch from this end, see, and wind the screw out so the daylight disappears. Now you just want to give everything a little jiggle, be kind to it. Piece of kit. Yeah, that's pretty good now. Right, now you can do this where all you do is just crank it out 1 1/4 turns and you hope for the best. But what we're going to do is we're going to be a little more sophisticated, and we're going to take the gauge, okay, and we'll put it round this way into the gate just till it touches. Do it twice just to make sure. That's just till it touches. Right, that's 8.55 millimeters. So what we're going to do is we're going to take it up to 8.65 millimeters. Take it up to 8.65 millimeters. Put it back in, and if I look down just to the edge, I can see the gap of that. Here it goes. I would say that is about spot on. Right. Now we've set that for idle. Now we're going to have to set it for fast idle on the choke. So see, I can do all this with one hand. It's going to get a bit complicated. That's the choke mechanism engaged. So that's it when it comes off. It's not terribly well adjusted, that. Right. So that is now sitting on the cam. And this is now where we want the 0.6 wire. Big now. That's pretty good. Just catching. So pretty good. Right, so let's look at that set up. Slightly. Check the thing a few times and then simulate your choke on. We've now set up this gap on the adjuster. We've already set it for the close idle, and now all we want to do is to make sure that the choke is capable of closing the shutter. Not too much, about there. Normally the tag should just basically point down. Right, I'm going to just try nipping that up now, and so on. Right, so far then we have now done this part, if you like, of the choke, of the carburetor. Right, the next thing we're going to have to do is take the top off, and then we've got to check the make sure the jets are clean, obviously, but also we're going to check the amount of fuel dosed by the accelerator pump. Another little jig. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take the top of the carburetor. Right, now you can do this without too much messing about But be very, very careful, because you've now set that nut there, right? So when you can undo this one, don't let that one turn out of adjustment, because otherwise you'll regret it, right? Spring comes off and you can take the hood off. Right, I'll show you how all that works. In top from bottom, right? Here is the injector pump pipe, which connects via there to here, and we want to be able to measure its output. So what I do is I put a little plastic hose going up to one of those printer cartridge ink injectors. Okay, I'll give you a little demonstration. Make sure that everything is free to operate. There goes the lever. See? One full turn, one full from one end to the other, right? And if you do 10 turns, it wants to be about 8 cc's. And the adjusting screw is here. So I'm just going to drain that down, reset my 0, count 10, and get that. Right, when you're cleaning out the little tube, the injector, you want to make sure, I know you always say you shouldn't, I use one strand of a piece of copper wire just to go down there and make sure the jet's clear. And then the other little trick is that instead of just puffing away down here, right, what you do is there's a very small screw that goes in there, right, on this side, because this is the master side, is hidden by the idle enricher, fast idle enricher, right, there. Blow your compressed air through there both ways to get it working. This was a bit blocked up. And then when you put the pump back together again, because you now know that you're giving 0.8 cc's per squirt, put some fuel in the tank, in the reservoir, and pump it a couple of times and make sure you actually see the fuel coming out the bottom. Here we are, we're building the engine up now. The 2 carbs have been put on and locked down on new gaskets, now to dry, no goop, right? And so before we can set up the rest of the engine, I like to put the ignition on now and put the coil in and get everything set up so that it's convenient and looks nicely laid out. Next thing to put on is the crossbar. Now the crossbar has got the fat end, or the long end if you like, by the actuator, whereas the other arm is smaller. This end has a spring and a plastic insert. This assembles up. I'll do this slowly for less camera swing. Haha. Now then, that is going to fit between here and here, and you want to make sure that the thing moves freely. I just had to adjust this one. If you can see, somebody in the past has welted this with a hammer, so I've just brought this gently back out so that the arm moves freely. So I'll set that up and then I'll show you. Right, so that's the crossbar in now, and as you can see, it moves very lightly and freely, just the slightest bit of finger touch, and it's fine. Don't connect these up yet, just leave these hanging loose on both sides. And when you assemble that, and also the vacuum line for the distributor and so on, use a little bit of silicone grease just to make the thing completely airtight, and especially for when you're setting it all up. Okay, now we're going to start looking at putting the rear pipes in and so on. So I'll get that set up and show you. Now this bar is fitted, turns nicely, a little bit of silicone grease in at both ends. Now then, there's two pipes for the rear. This one here, which goes into the clip that goes underneath here, there, that's the one that's going to provide the vacuum feed for the brake servo system, i.e. this one. Right, now this is all going to be changed for new Jubilee clips throughout. I would suggest you put Jubilee clips on, especially if the rubber's rather old, because you don't want any leaks in the system. And then the second one is the more complex looking pipe. This is the one with the little vacuum takeoff, and this is the one that is going to balance between the carburetors. Right, that's down to one inlet manifold, that's down to the other inlet manifold, and that's down to the air intake, the air controller. Right, okay. I'm putting a blanking on here for the moment because we're going to be running it with no air cleaners on to help set up the carburetors. Apart from that, silicone, little double silicone grease into everything, makes it all slide on, makes it all so much easier than struggling away. Right, okay. So there we are. Now the next thing to do would be to put in the fuel lines and then start making up the wiring loom, and also change any Jubilee clips and anything else you want to do just to make the whole thing spot on. Right, hello again. Well, here we are. This engine's advanced a bit. We've got the rear pipe work fitted. Carburetors are all now fitted up. We've set in the ignition. We've put in the coil. We're starting to get ourselves a bit tidier. There's always that one extra little thing, yes. When you're doing number 2 cylinder, a good little tip is to put 2 hats, one bung there and one bung above it. That's an old one that I've just cleaned up and put on, because since this hole is so deep, you can't always get the mushroom little hat to fit. Originally these were a much longer specific item for Volkswagens. Also, when we're putting the whole thing together, despite this thing running and so on, look, here we are. Hold it up to the light and you can see it. There you are. Can you see that's broken on the top there? There's a nice little crack, so that'll cause a misfire. If it doesn't cause a misfire this week, it'll cause it next week, because 9 breakdowns out of 10 of an engine are due to the electrics. So speaking of electrics, slowly round, I've been making up the new wiring loom, which goes from the left hand side of the engine and goes all the way through. I've put the lengths of each wire for you. That's the actual operating cut length. Okay, 15 centimeters, 15 centimeters, 22 centimeters, 15 centimeters, 80 centimeters, 26 centimeters, the last one. Okay, and when you're making these up, please don't use these, the little compressed clips and so on. They might be alright for doing your indicator lights or stereo and so on, but we don't want your ignition to fail. These are bare clips. You put them on with the same tool, the bare clips and a separate hat, and you crimp it up in 2 stages. You can even solder them if you were doing off-road and wet and so on. It's not a bad idea to solder them. just use a standard tool. Okay, so now that we've got all this made up, I'm going to put it in place on the engine, and I'll show you where we are in a minute. The wiring in place now. Use a bit of stiffener tube like the original. This way it keeps the wiring well away from all the mechanism. Run the cable through nicely, and I'm going to put little clips here to hold everything together, but only when we're really at the final stages. Okay, so there we go. Make sure you clean up all the terminals and make it all bright and shiny and sparkly before you do it. And then what we do is we do a continuity test, but I'll show you all that later on. Got the wiring in. We've got the little protecting shroud over the cable. This keeps it nicely away from all the mechanism. The wire goes neatly across. Here we are, nice and neat. Now what we do is, with a multimeter set on big amps and the terminals connected, your negative, which is going to be the feed to the carburetors, and your positive, which is your feed from the battery. Okay, so that when you switch the ignition on, the coil is not connected up. When you switch the ignition on, you're going to see a reading. You want to see somewhere getting on for 4 amperes, which indicates that both 1, 2 of the choke heater coils are working. Right, now I just have to stretch around for this. Right, switching on now. There we are, 3 amperes. I'm quite happy with that. Okay, so now I'll connect it all back together, and then we do the timing check to see how long it takes for the chokes to open and make sure they're open correctly. So, that's the engine reassembled. I've run it for a few minutes just to make sure everything's alright. Now, these little linkages here, there's one on this side, one on the other side. They have to be in very nice synchronization. Mustn't have them too wound in, mustn't have them too wound out, so that everything acts together. Right? When you start up, I've just shown you, make sure you've got your amperes. Give it a couple of minutes. You want to see that your butterflies, choke butterflies, have come up, directly up, and that you are definitely, it's a difficult thing to see, off the fast idle cam. Okay? Now you set your RPM to about, I'll say 800, and then this is where the technology starts to come in. You need yourself a gas analyzer, okay, which connects to the battery and connects to the exhaust. So we'll then start it up, and we're going to check the air-fuel mixture, the CO, at idle, because on these older engines, idle really is all that they look for on the emission controls. Okay, now the other thing we're going to do is we're going to use this very sophisticated device, which, as you can see, consists of an aerosol cap and a Gunson SU carburetor balancer with a little float and a bit of foam around the bottom. And what we're going to do is we're going to put over each carburetor, one at a time, just to see that there's the right amount of air going through. Okay, then we can do that again at a higher RPM if you really want. Okay, right, I'll set that up and show you the gauge. Okay, so the engine's running now, and we're getting 13.2 on tick over, which is pretty good for the emissions. That's only a tick over mine. And then just compare the amount of air going through each one. Yeah, that's about right now. Right, so that's the engine running nicely at a fastened up idle and ready to go. Now the next thing you've got to do is to try it again in the morning, stone cold, and make sure all the chokes work and that it will start properly. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to put on all the air filters and the such like and see if that makes very much difference. Shouldn't make much difference with a clean air filter.